Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
And greetings. Thank you so much for joining me, Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse, for another edition of Herbally Yours, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Herbally Yours brings you the latest information about the many facets in the world of natural living. Today, we are so happy to have as our guest Sarah Kucera, who is a chiropractor and has been championing healthy practices professionally for over a decade and personally for her whole life. She is a licensed chiropractor, a certified Ayurvedic practitioner, registered yoga teacher and yoga therapist, and an entrepreneur. She's the founder of SAGE, a healing arts center and herbal apothecary in Kansas City, Missouri, where she combines these methods to help others find well-being. She's also the author of a beautiful new book called The Ayurvedic Self-Care Handbook, Holistic Healing Rituals for Every Day and Season. Beautiful books, beautiful name of the book, and we'll be talking about it today. And thank you so much for joining us today, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, let's go back in time and talk about your own personal path. How did you decide to become a chiropractor?
Well, I've always had an interest in health and more specifically in movement and just observing how both my body and other people's bodies move. So I can't say that there was a master plan from the beginning to become a chiropractor, but as it was, I had studied exercise science as my undergraduate degree, and then wasn't really sure what I wanted to do from that point. Kind of thought maybe physical therapy, volunteered a little bit, seemed like that wasn't really the path I wanted to choose, and then looked into some other career paths that were in the healthcare field, and chiropractic really spoke to me because of its more holistic form of healing, and that we're not using pharmaceuticals, and then again that it focuses a lot on how movement heals the body.
It certainly does. And what chiropractic school did you go to?
I went to, at the time it was called Cleveland Chiropractic College, and it's in Kansas City, Missouri. They've since changed their name and kind of evolved and added some different programs, and now they're called Cleveland University.
Oh, so that was local to you.
Yes, it was local.
So that was really convenient. You didn't even have to move. You're right in Kansas City.
Exactly.
So is there a big holistic community in Missouri?
I would say overall, if you look at Kansas City and even just the Midwest, we obviously don't think of this area of the country as being the mecca for wellness. In fact, I think several years ago, Kansas City was among one of the fattest cities in America. So in some ways, we're more in the unhealthy category than we are the healthy category. But there is a big pocket of people that are interested in wellness and in health. And so, yes, where I stand, there is a big community and a lot of interest in this type of care.
Because, yeah, that is true. The middle of the country doesn't seem to be what stands out as where we have all these, holistic things. But then again, it seems to be spreading everywhere. Myself, I have been involved in a holistic lifestyle since 1964. And at that time, it really wasn't too many places at all. But it's really expanding because when we look at the evidence and the science, we find that natural healing techniques should be standard of practice. And that is really what the focus of my life is about, is to where these kinds of healings that you're offering, which are traditional healing modalities such as Ayurveda, that's what we're talking about when we use that word traditional, really have a much better outcome when we look at things such as efficacy and safety.
Right, and also I would say in the area of preventive care, I think that all systems of medicine, whether you're calling it traditional or more modern medicine, I think everything has its place, but certain systems fit well in different arenas, and I think that in this case, our more traditional medicines really focus on keeping us well so that we don't have to rely on more of our emergency types of medicine.
That is a very good way to put it. Certainly, conventional medicine, modern medicine, allopathic medicine, whatever you want to call the mainstream medicine of the day, is needed and necessary and excellent and life-saving when used appropriately. But what's going on right now is that it is overused and it's being used as the first go-to, and there's really almost no prevention other than mammographies and vaccinations. That's their entire prevention protocol. But something like Ayurveda, like you said, because it is traditional and how it was even set up in the beginning, is the fact that what happened with that was so excellent is that a lot of the practitioners and providers, even in traditional Chinese medicine, were paid when everyone stayed well. So that sets up a whole other, focus for them.
Right. I think that's true. And what I'm seeing is that as we're evolving as a society and we've gone from a place where we didn't have technology and we weren't so industrialized, and as that grew, that's where our interests turned, and that includes medicine. And now I feel that people are turning to more natural approaches and things that are, when I say natural, I mean truly like in the way that it fits with nature, whether that's doing things by hand or looking at our food as more of a healing modality. So I do think that we've kind of come full circle, and it also has to do with just other things that are happening in our society as well.
Yes, very much so. But what made you move towards Ayurveda as your focus? I had a practice in yoga prior to going to chiropractic college.
I was a yoga student and also was dabbling with teaching yoga. I had been taking different teacher trainings and workshops to learn more about the philosophy of yoga and the practice of yoga. And that came before I became educated as a chiropractor. And what I found after that, while I was practicing chiropractic, which was at the time and still is in the environment of also a yoga community in a yoga studio or yoga center, the two practices of chiropractic and yoga fit really well together. And when you look at Ayurveda as the sister science to yoga, it actually looks like a bridge between chiropractic care and yoga. And in that, I mean, as a chiropractor, we're very much educated as an osteopath or a medical physician, a medical doctor, until we reach a certain point. So we have a lot of the basic sciences that are the same, and even some of our clinical sciences are the same. But most people now aren't going to their chiropractor necessarily for the flu or for an ear infection or more visceral conditions. And I do think that that's still happening, but I do think now that we're also moving more to where we go to our chiropractor when we're having some kind of ailment that's associated with our musculoskeletal system. And with yoga having a philosophy about being an internal practice, being more the practice of the mind, and Ayurveda then being a study of both the physical and the mental and the emotional, what I found is that there are all these different things that Ayurveda incorporates that I could use to help heal conditions that maybe I personally wasn't using chiropractic for, like digestive conditions, if someone had acid reflux or let's say they were constipated. But Ayurveda really had the remedies for that. And because it is a sister science to yoga, it really was like the strong connection between the two. And so instead of my practice just being a focus of only chiropractic or only yoga or having them separate, though they were in the same space, I was really able to use Ayurveda to bring everything together.
great explanation. And I'd like to remind you, listeners, that you are listening to Herbally Yours, the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse, and today my guest is Dr. Sarah Kucera, and we're focusing on her book, her beautiful new book, The Ayurvedic Self-Care Handbook, Holistic Healing Rituals for Every Day and Season. And there's a lot I love about this book, Dr. Kucera, because you're focusing it on how an individual can do this for themselves with really no training.
Right. The important thing for me in writing this book was to, as the title suggests it being a handbook, was really to put in the reader's hands something that they could use as a tool to help find a foundation of health on their own.
And what do you mean by using the word healing rituals?
I really find that the way we conduct our day is essential for creating a foundation for health. So when I say ritual, I could also use the word routine. I could also choose the word habit, and neither of those have quite the same meaning in terms of the mindfulness and intention that comes around the things that we do, let's say, in the beginning of our day or the middle of our day or before we go to bed. And so when I say ritual, I'm suggesting that the first actions of our day, when they are intentional, when they are repeated and they're consistent, and when they also incorporate the things that we need to, whether it's our health or how we're looking to strive as a business person, that those things are essential for setting up our day. And then likewise in the evening, those intentional actions are really important for closing out our day. And when we can do that, when we can bookend our days, we create a container which helps us to really keep track of all the things that we're doing and to really be more present in the rest of our day.
Well, I love the way you talk about things that are very inexpensive and easy to do in terms of self-care and how much they can help a person just stay well or get well if they need that.
Yes, I think that self-care should be accessible to everyone, and I also do love things like more decadent oils, and I like to use different crystals and some of the things like my meditation practice, some of those sorts of things that I do. But they're completely unnecessary if you don't really have the means for it. It might be something that enhances your practice, but you don't necessarily need all of those specific tools. And so I really wanted to present to the reader a way that you can start some of these things on your own without having to invest in anything that seemed a little bit lavish or elaborate.
That is a really big point, because I think that's one of the things that is somewhat true and certainly a thought form, that natural medicine is only for the wealthy. But when you break it down to the really simple things, like I've said to patients sometimes, you're going to tell me you can't afford a cabbage, right? Is that what you're telling me? You can only afford junk food. You know, that's just not the case. But they go, no, organic food is so expensive. Well, even if you bought an organic cabbage, it's maybe 89 cents instead of 25 cents a pound. So it's really, very, very little different. But if you can't do an organic cabbage, you still could do cabbage versus McDonald's or, fast food. But the concept is often that natural healing is expensive, which is not necessarily the case. And your book really makes it something very, very simple and accessible.
Yes, that's exactly what I wanted. And that comparison that you talk about with food is exactly what I mean, is that everything sort of exists on a continuum. And can you do, the most, like you're saying, the finest organic produce? Maybe not, but you can still do produce. And I think that that's really important for people to know.
That's true. So we're going to take a little break here, Dr. Sarah, and I'd like you to know that you are listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Listen live online at nccradio.org or on iHeartRadio. For more information on today's guest or topic, Email us at whpc@ncc.edu. Stay tuned. Herbally Yours will be right back.
Levy found them.
He seems sorry.
We very clearly told him not to look up there.
I'm honestly impressed that he was able to do it.
Right? What, did he balance on that big chair?
Yeah, I mean, I guess he'll just know what his gifts are this year.
I really thought we had hidden them well.
If they can find their presents, they can find a gun.
911, what is your emergency?
Every day, 8 kids and teens are unintentionally killed or injured by loaded and unlocked guns. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and End Family Fire.
Hi, I'm Dr. David Hill with today's tip for kids from the American Academy of Pediatrics. Kids today are surrounded by screens, starting when they're babies. But children don't need to learn to use technology right away. Toddlers learn best by playing, reading, talking, and singing with their parents. You, not an app, are your child's best teacher. When you are ready to introduce media, choose wisely and set some boundaries. Visit healthychildren.org/media use plan to create your plan.
And welcome back to more right here on Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Ellen Kamai, and my guest today is Dr. Sarah Kucera, and we're talking about topics in her book, The Ayurvedic Self-Care Handbook, Holistic Healing Rituals for Every Day and Season. I just love the name of that in and of itself. It's so holistic. And Dr. Sarah, we talk about doshas in Ayurvedic studies, but not everybody knows what a dosha is. How does your book introduce that concept?
Well, a dosha, first I have to say that it introduces a concept in what I feel is a basic way and emphasizes the idea that we don't have to necessarily know what our dosha, or what our dosha is, our constitution. We don't necessarily need to know everything about that. We don't necessarily need to know what our dosha is, but it is very, very helpful. And of course, if you're looking to study or practice Ayurveda in more depth, you really do need to know what that is, and it's often easiest to see a practitioner to really get a more reliable idea of what your dosha is. But your dosha overall is a way of saying, how does nature exist within you? Ayurveda talks about nature being made of 5 elements, which are ether, air, fire, water, and earth. And what the doshas are the ways that those different elements are present within us. So everyone has all of these 3 doshas, which are called Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. So these 3 doshas are present in everyone because the elements are present in everyone. Now what differs is the way that they are expressed or the amount that they are expressed. And that's what makes each person more unique as an individual, whether that's the way that they present physically, the way that they think, their interests, their vulnerabilities in terms of their physiology. So it can be an essential tool to know what your constitution is, because it's sort of like a roadmap or a blueprint to let you know, like, look out for these types of foods, or look out for these types of interactions, or this might be what your stress response typically is, which in that case it helps us to study ourselves much deeper. So a constitution is really about how do we see nature within us, and how are we as a unique individual.
Yeah,
and
also what I love about Ayurveda is it takes into account that individual with that, let's say, health issue, today. Like, for instance, if it's a day that's very, very hot and humid out, that's different than what might go on for that person and with that condition on a day when it's snowing and freezing cold.
Exactly. And I think that is often the strongest draw. And I can see when I'm in appointments with patients, their face sort of light up as I'm talking about these things, because you can tell that I'm speaking to them, to that specific person, truly as an individual, and they can see that I understand them, and that I understand that how they might have a condition that's the same as someone else, but but the way that their symptoms are experienced are not necessarily the same. And so even within their family, they may not tolerate different things that their family members do, and they really want to know, like, how do I manage that personally, because it's not going to be the same as everyone else around me.
That's exactly right. So let's give an example in terms of, let's say, midsummer, right?
Sure.
If the time was midsummer and it was in the 90s and hot and humid, which goes on in many places, like I live often a lot of the year in Florida, it's kind of like that all the time. And then in New York, it's like that some of the time. And I'm not sure about Kansas City, but I'm sure it's about the same thing. It fluctuates. It's one of those places with 4 seasons, right?
Mm-hmm,
so with a specific kind of health issue, how would the Ayurvedic suggestions vary?
The first thing to know before I really get in depth with that is that we work along the principle of like increases like, or an accumulation theory. And what that means is that if I participate in activities that create a certain sort of effect in my body, or I eat a certain type of food that creates a certain type of effect in my body, and since we're talking about the seasons, let's just say hot or cold, that I might have an emotional response to something that makes me feel hot. And you can think of like the example of anger or judgment or resentment. Those things feel hot in our body. So this idea of accumulation is that when we experience those different things, we can start to create an imbalance within us. So no matter how hot or cold you run, you're someone that could still in some way have an excess of heat or have an excess of cold in your life. So in the summer now, speaking specifically about the summer, and yes, in the Midwest where I am, it can be oppressively hot, like heat index of, over 100 or over 110 sometimes. So what the idea is that no matter who you are, you still have to pay attention to the fact that it is hot. It is very hot outside. So what this means is that with the weather, with the season being hot, we don't want to eat certain foods in excess that will also create heat within us. So for example, we might know that spicy foods create heat. I think that's something that everyone could sort of understand, experience, and even intellectualize. What you may not know is that there are other tastes that also create heat within the body, such as the taste of sour, like if you had a sour fruit, or when we talk about sour as food being fermented or has soured, such as cheese or any kind of bread that would have yeast in it, those things also create heat within the body, as does salt, which is maybe a little bit easier to understand because if you had an open wound or a cut and you had salt in it, it would burn. So when we eat those types of foods, they create more heat within us. So you can imagine if you are eating a diet of primarily heating foods, and it's very hot outside, something will happen at some point where you've gotten too much heat, and now you're either experiencing an emotion that has to do with heat or a physical response that has to do with heat, such as a rash or maybe a flare-up of an inflammatory condition, or even a change in your digestion like hyperacidity or having like diarrhea or loose stool. Those are all things that are associated with excess heat in the body. So we want to tend to our activities, our diet, our lifestyle, looking at it as what can I do to mitigate those things, knowing that it is hot outside, and to prevent things from having essentially like an overflow of heat. And that would be no matter who you are. Now, of course, the people that are naturally hotter, so our fiery people, they have to be on the lookout much sooner because that overflow would happen quicker for them.
Well, that's a good explanation, and I'd like to remind our listeners that you are listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse, and today my guest is Dr. Sarah Kucera, and she is the author of the Ayurvedic Self-Care Handbook, Holistic Healing Rituals for Every Day and Season. And that's why I brought up like summer, that's a season, and of course it might be a different discussion with a very cold day. But one of the things I love about your book, Dr. Sarah, is you have very specific recipes. Like I saw one for making your own natural tooth powder. for example. What are some of the other excellent, super easy, do-it-yourself things that you have in your book?
Well, one of the bigger things that, in terms of recipes, is that I think that if we can incorporate one food or one drink into our day that is medicinal, and that we think of that as based on how do we feel that day or in that moment, that can be something that everyone can do. It can be made from some of the spices in our kitchen, and those spices then are medicinal and can help us to heal. So for many different conditions that I have outlined, for each one of those I have a medicinal drink that helps people to manage that condition just by mixing something up, maybe at the beginning of the day or the end of their day, to help remedy what they're experiencing just by sitting down and having 8 to 10 ounces of a medicinal drink. So that's one thing. There's also a recipe for a traditional dish within Ayurveda that's called khichdi, which is meant to be the most cleansing, nourishing food that one could have, and that's it's a big staple within an Ayurvedic diet, that you can use this food to reset your body so that you're able to process both the tangible and non-tangible things, so things like our food, but also our thoughts and our emotions.
Well, let's talk about that recipe. Why don't you tell us what it is, because people can find it in your book.
Sure. So khichdi is a traditional dish that's made of mung beans, which are like lentils, and also white basmati rice. And white rice is a little bit easier for us to break down than brown rice, so it's become more popular for people to choose brown rice because the nutritional content is higher, but the problem is that we can't break it down quite as easily, and then we can't get the nutrients from that food or even the other foods that we're having with it. So this dish is made of mung beans and rice, and it uses spices that are really great for digestion, such as cumin and turmeric and ginger, and those things are also, they serve primarily in this dish for helping us to break down and absorb and eliminate what we, absorb the good and eliminate the bad, but they also have other medicinal uses as well. So it's a very porridgey type food, sort of think of like the consistency of an oatmeal, or if you're someone that enjoys other Indian dishes, that same kind of almost like a soupiness about it. It can be very thick. And so it's something that you can have any season. You can also incorporate seasonal vegetables to help make it more seasonally appropriate.
Right, and so that would be something people could even cook. You don't have to stand there and cook it every single day. I imagine you could make it ahead of time and warm it up.
You could, but this goes back to the continuum that we were talking about earlier, is that there are practices that could be extremely good for us, and then maybe some that are still good but not quite as good. So Ayurveda views leftovers as not having quite the energetic component that fresh food does. And we use the word prana, which means energy or life force, to describe that sort of vitality that's within our food. So sure, I would say definitely make a big batch of that and have it for a couple of days if that's going to mean you're eating really healthy food and you're having food that you can process and it's decreasing your stress level. But in the most ideal of situations, we would have that in a fresh way every single day.
That's true. But in that ideal situation, women in particular were home all day to cook, and now that's not always the case. So,
Absolutely.
Right, exactly. making it more modern and to, be actually something someone could use might mean giving up the made fresh every day versus not having it at all.
Absolutely. I completely agree.
So that's how it is in today's modern life. Well, we're going to be actually ending our show very soon. So give our listeners, a wonderful sort of takeaway from today's show. You gave us so many excellent, specific suggestions. And, of course, the best thing to do is get your book. I'm sure it's widely available, the Ayurvedic Self-Care Handbook.
Sure. I think that, as a takeaway, it's best to decide what you need for your health in any given moment. So instead of looking at the big picture all the time, just think, what do I need in this moment right now?
Thank you so much. And you can find more at Dr. Kucera's website. That's Sarah Kucera, KUCERA.com. And of course, we'll be posting this show on our archives if you'd like to let your friends join us and listen at another time. And thank you so much for tuning into Herbally Yours, produced in the studios of 90.3 WHPC, Nassau Community College, Garden City, New York. For further information, email us at whpc@ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamai.